Before we begin, I want to tell you why this story matters to you. Not just to Sudanese people, not just to Africa, to you, wherever you are watching this. If you buy goods shipped from Asia to Europe, Sudan matters. If you pay energy bills affected by oil prices, Sudan matters. If you live in a country dealing with migration, Sudan matters. If you believe great powers should not be allowed to arm genocides for profit, then Sudan matters as well. The war in Sudan is not happening in a distant corner of the world that has nothing to do with the rest of us. It is happening at one of the most strategically vital points on Earth, where the Nile meets the Red Sea, where the sea route towards the Suez Canal begins, where Russia, China, the United States, Turkey, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and even Iran are all competing for military and economic influence. Sudan is where the next chapter of great power competition is being written in blood. Imagine a country larger than Western Europe, or say the same size as the entire portion of the United States located east of the Mississippi River. Now imagine it completely on fire. A war so brutal, so vast, and so cynically used by foreign powers that the rest of the world simply looked away. This is Sudan. And what is happening there may be the most important geopolitical crisis you have never heard about. On April 15, 2023, two generals turned their guns on each other. They had been partners in a military coup just 2 years before. Now they were enemies. On one side stood General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, commander of the Sudanese armed forces, the official army. On the other side stood General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti, commander of the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary force hundreds of thousands strong. After a bitter 2 years confrontation, they divided Sudan in two, with the creation of two armed camps backed by rival foreign powers locked in permanent conflict at the heart of Africa. Because of this war, over 11.5 million people are displaced in Sudan, basically the population of North Carolina or Belgium. The largest internal displacement crisis in the world. Another 4.5 million have fled across borders. Around 1/3 of Sudan's 50 million people have been forced from their homes, and famine has been officially declared in several regions. According to the United States State Department, the atrocities committed in Sudan amount to genocide. These are the same militias known as the Janjaweed responsible for the first Darfur genocide in 2003. The same commanders, just new uniforms. But Sudan is not just a civil war, it is a proxy battlefield. The United Arab Emirates has been accused by UN experts, Western intelligence, and human rights organizations of supplying the Rapid Support Forces with Chinese-made drones, artillery, and ammunition delivered via cargo flights for a small airstrip in Chad close to the Sudanese border. Abu Dhabi denies this, but multiple investigations describe a clear pattern. The incentives are obvious. Control of Sudanese gold, long-term land deals, and access to RSF fighters used as mercenaries in other conflicts. Russia's role is more layered. The Wagner Group, the private military force that came to fame during the Bakhmut battle in Ukraine and whose leader Viktor Prigozhin mysteriously died in an airplane explosion after his conflict with Vladimir Putin, has been present in Sudan for years, mining gold and supporting local elites. As the war unfolded, Moscow shifted support towards the official army, the Sudanese armed forces, in exchange for negotiations over a long-term naval base in Port Sudan on the Red Sea. The plan envisions a 25-year lease hosting several Russian warships, including potentially nuclear-capable vessels, at one of the world's key maritime choke points. Also, Iran has provided the Sudanese armed forces with drones and other weapons, so many that new storage facilities were built at Port Sudan. Tehran wants a foothold on the Red Sea to project power towards Suez, the Gulf of Aden, and beyond. Turkey has supplied systems including Bayraktar drones that played a major role in the Sudanese armed forces' reconquest of urban areas, and even Egypt has gradually moved from quiet support to active involvement. All these players have different goals. None of them has an interest in the war ending quickly. Everyone wants the conflict to last just long enough to secure its own position. Now, look at the map. To the east of Sudan lies the Red Sea and Bab el Mandeb Strait, the Gate of Tears. At its narrowest point, it is only about 30 kilometers wide. Through this corridor passes roughly 12% of global seaborne trade and the majority of container traffic between Europe and Asia. Most of the submarine internet cables linking Europe and Asia also run along this route. The Red Sea corridor was already in crisis due to Houthi attacks on shipping. Attacks launched from Yemen have reduced traffic in parts of the corridor to a fraction of previous levels and have pushed many shipping companies to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope around Africa. Sudan's collapse adds another layer of instability to this maritime system. Port Sudan is the country's main outlet to the sea and a potential site for Russian or Iranian bases. At the same time, across the water in Djibouti, the United States has its main African base. China has its first overseas base just next door. France, Italy, and Japan also maintain bases. On a very small piece of coastline, you find almost the entire global hierarchy of military power compressed into a few square kilometers. This is not stable balance, it is a concentrated permanent risk of escalation. And the war spills out into the region as well. To the west, Chad hosts vast refugee camps and at the same time is used as a logistic hub for armed flows into Sudan. Fighting has already crossed the border with rapid support forces clashing with Chadian forces. To the south, South Sudan, itself fragile and conflict-prone, is drawn in through armed groups moving in both directions and through the disruption of shared oil infrastructure. To the east, Ethiopia and Eritrea stand on a knife edge. The borderlands between Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea have become corridors for arms and fighters. Then there is already mentioned Egypt. It depends, in fact, on the Nile for over 90% of its fresh water. Sudan sits where the White Nile and the Blue Nile meet. In parallel, Ethiopia has built and filled the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile over objections both from Sudan and Egypt. In 2025, an unannounced water release from the dam contributed to serious flooding downstream. If Sudan disintegrates into rival proto-states backed by competing foreign powers, the stability of the Nile water regime and thus Egyptian internal stability are put at risk. Finally, the migration dimension. As the war continues, people flee north. Egypt now hosts over 1 million Sudanese refugees, making Sudanese one of the largest refugee communities in the country. The Egyptian economy is under heavy stress, and the authorities have responded by tightening border controls and, according to rights groups, deporting even registered refugees. Many Sudanese move further towards Libya. There, they join other migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean towards Europe. Sudan has become one of the principal sources of people on the central Mediterranean route. Sudan's war, therefore, is already shaping migration politics in the European Union. So when we talk about Sudan, we're not talking about a local conflict. We're talking about the largest displacement crisis on the planet, a confirmed genocide unfolding now in real time, a proxy battleground for the United Arab Emirates, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Egypt, a contested Red Sea coastline that underpins global trade and data flows, a shock to the Nile basin that directly affects the stability of Egypt and Ethiopia, a driver of migration that is already reaching the shores of Europe. Sudan is the point where humanitarian catastrophe, resource competition, great power rivalry, and migration pressures all intersect. And that is why the Sudan war matters, not only for Sudanese lives, but for the future shape of Eastern Africa, the security of the Red Sea and the Suez Corridor, and the politics of Europe and the wider world.